Okay, hello and welcome to today's webcast, the third in a three-part series presented by Jet Reports with the theme of Getting Real About Business Intelligence. I'm Jason Dumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and I am really glad to be joined once again today by our returning presenter, John Esch. John is Vice President of BI at Jet Reports, and John, we're really happy to have you back once again. John is also joined today by Jet Reports Director of BI, Brian Peterson. So, Brian, welcome to you too. And before I hand off control, let me just add that we do invite our audience to ask questions today. We'll be saving those for the end, but you can enter them anytime as we go along. Just use the Q&A block that you should see to the right of the slides. And without further delay, John, let me hand things off to you.
All right. Thank you, Jason. And hello, everybody. John Esch here with Jet Reports. This is the last of our three-part series on business intelligence, and I think we have a lot of returning attendees here. So thanks for coming on this little journey and this conversation with us. And we also have some new ones. I've noticed. I'm checking the attendee list here. So we've got a combination of folks, and for those of you who have seen the other presentations, we first had a big BI strategy talk where I just talked, in philosophical terms about what business intelligence is and what some of the problems with it are and why it's kind of hard to implement. And then yesterday we talked to an end user of Jet Reports and got what I thought was some pretty valuable insight into how they went about building their BI environment. But nobody's seen any software yet. So today I'm going to do something that I don't normally do, which is actually show some software and let you kind of see what we're talking about here. And that's why today's title is Business Intelligence 5 Times Faster, because that's what we're all about at Jet. And let me just kind of get into it here. I got a couple of slides first, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I talked about in terms of a review. But I'm going to take it from a slightly different angle so I don't bore the people who have seen it before. So let me get on my slide here. So here's my obligatory Jet Report slide. As I always say, hey, we're great. Jet is great. But I always want to point out we've been in the market for a long time, 15 years in the Dynamics market, and we have a loyal following of 10,000 clients around the world with hundreds of thousands of users. And I just always want to point out that we got to that point because we really try to make our software work for the business user. We don't, I'd like to say, we don't really like to sell software at Jet. We just like to make people's data work for them. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Jet Enterprise, which is the name that we have given our entire business intelligence suite. And so that is a front end that allows your end users to interact with the data. And then I think very importantly, a back-end solution that we call a data warehouse automation solution, which allows you to build the data structures that are ultimately going to make sense for your end users. And so the way it works with us is that we have a pre-built data warehouse and a pre-built set of cubes for all Dynamics, and that's really a great starting point for folks. It lets you get started right away. That implementation happens in 2 hours. You can start building dashboards. You can start building reports off of the data structures that we come out of the box with. Of course, you've got a bunch of pre-built reports. Again, great place to start. Data warehouse automation tool, we're going to see that today, and that's what helps you, manage that data. The ways that that's the back end part, the ways that you interact with the data, we go from simple to very sophisticated. We like to start people off in Excel because everybody knows Excel, and everybody can use it to some degree. Comfort level is there, learning curve is short, and so we have an Excel add-in, which I'm going to show you, and it's actually very functional and has a ton of usability features. We take you from an Excel add-in and start layering on levels of capability, if you will, and so that's where we end, is at a mobile application where you can build reports on the web, in a web browser, and you can let people go to that web page that you've built and see the reports, or you can distribute it to their iPads or other devices. Right? Super cool product. We're actually not going to look at that today because we're going to run out of time. But that's something that is an exciting product for us. It's fairly new, about a year old, and I'm happy to show it to anybody who has Interest in it. Okay, so here's the importance of a data warehouse. I'm going to talk through this just to kind of get us level set, and I put this slide up because I get this question asked a lot. So why do I need a data warehouse? I mean, Microsoft out-of-the-box Cubes, they don't have a data warehouse. There's some other BI solutions out there that don't really use one. So, and I think that a data warehouse is really kind of the most important, what's a very central concept in business intelligence, because the data warehouse is really a database that you have built off of your various systems where you can then have control over your data. And one of the big things about this is that it is a method of simplifying the data. We all know that ERPs are notoriously hard to get data out of, and other data systems that you might say it's a payroll system or something. Those systems are built for taking in data, and they enforce a process and a posting flow to your data, and they spread the data out in a bunch of weird ways that doesn't make sense unless you're in the ERP world. We actually call that OLTP versus OLAP, so that's online transaction processing. That's the way that the data exists in your ERP. And then what we do in a data warehouse is we take the data out of that transaction processing format and we put it into an OLAP format, which stands for online analytical processing. So it's a format that's made for actually being able to see the data. That's a long way of saying we take the data out of the ERP, we simplify it, we put it into a format that is better for reporting. And it's important because almost everybody, I don't know if we have any, let's say 99.9% of our clients have more than just one data system out there. Everybody wants to combine the various data systems that they have. It might be an ERP and plus CRM, ERP plus Salesforce, or ERP plus that payroll system that I was talking about earlier. And that just means more complexity for the end user. Data warehouse simplifies that. And as we build it, we're optimizing that data for the business user. So we're putting it into a structure that they can understand. Another thing about data warehouses is Brian and I have both noticed this. I'm seeing, I read the tech press, I'm seeing data warehousing become more and more and more popular. And so that's why I'm saying data warehousing and data warehouses, data warehousing tools, data warehousing skills, they're very in demand. In fact, Microsoft now, this is a little known fact, requires the ability to build a data warehouse for even your very first SQL certification. And building a data warehouse, as we're going to see in a second, is not a trivial thing. It can be very hard. But don't worry, right? There's a book written by this guy, Dijon Sarka. He's kind of a guru in the hallways of Jet Reports. And he's written a book that talks about how to build a data warehouse. It is 600 pages long, just to show you the complexity that can be built here. And let's talk a little bit about that, about how we used to build data warehouses. It's really all hand coding. You have to write SQL code. And it's not just one part of SQL that you're using, but you're using several different parts of SQL, using SQL Server integration services and analysis services and MDX, all that stuff that is packaged up in their program that they call Visual Studio. And it takes time. Even for a skilled programmer, it takes time. And as we know, time equals money. But I want to stress it's not just that one SQL developer that you need in order to build a data warehouse. It's multiple different types, because the person who knows integration services might not know analysis services or MDX. And the people who know those tools aren't really going to know how to put what we call, they're not going to know dimensional modeling, which is how do we put the data into a structure that a business user can really make sense of. So a set of complex tools to master. Here's kind of a list of them. Right, all the stuff that's in Visual Studio, we used to call that BIDS. Now we call it SQL Server Data Tools. And SQL Server Management Studio is its own beast as well. So, lots of complexity there. I think I have we're coming up soon, I have a graphical representation of that. Okay, so that's the good and the bad of data warehouses. They're super important, gives you that one version of the truth, lets you put data in a way that's simple, but they're just historically very, very hard to create and very time consuming. I think this is where business intelligence tends to get its black eye, because we've heard those stories of the super long implementation that has gone way over budget in terms of time and money. At the end of the day, it's not very good, and nobody's really happy. That's kind of a classic story in the data warehousing space, which is why our concept of data warehouse automation is important. And just like automation in general, automation in manufacturing, it just allows more work to be done in less time. And time equals money, right? And what we do in the DWA world is we have gone through the data warehousing lifecycle, and we have found all those repetitive and error-prone and labor-intensive tasks that you just kind of have to do and you can't get away with. And we have automated those. I'm using this weird word here, programmatically, because what we do is I'm trying to not use the word programmatic again, but let's say that I'll give you a practical example. The way you move data from your ERP to a data warehouse is by writing a SQL Server Integration Services transfer package. Okay, that moves the data from one place to another. That piece of SQL code, I measured it once. I was looking over Brian Peterson's shoulder, and I measured it when he was writing it. Is 8 inches long, right? And it's 8 horrible inches of words that don't make any sense, and a comma and a closed parentheses and open parentheses, and it's crazy. And if you get one of those little details wrong, then your integration services package fails, and you have to go back and redo it. And what we do in our solution is that we automate that, and that means that it's done the same way by a machine, by a computer, and it's perfect every time. So that's where I get that word programmatically. So data warehouse automation, some people say, oh yeah, we have an ETL tool, right? An ETL, it's extract, transform, and load. And that is a thing where we're extracting data out of the ERP, where we're transforming it in various ways, and then where we're loading it into its final format, which might be a cube, right? And data warehouse is more than that. It includes the ETL process, but data warehouse is much more comprehensive because it allows you to go through that entire data warehouse lifecycle, everything from data discovery and design all the way down to change management, version control, even the documentation of what you have built. So it's a full-on, it's not just an ETL tool that we don't just automate the ETL processes, we automate that entire lifecycle. So here's kind of a view of the way a typical data warehouse architecture looks. If you go left to right, you see all these various source systems that you have. Then you have an ETL process. Then you have a data warehouse. And then you have the various ways that you're going to analyze that data in the front end. And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, is in order to get to that far right slide on your screen, where you're actually analyzing the data, you have to have people on staff who can use all these tools and who can spend the time writing that code. And then you have to test that code, and then you have to validate it with the end users. It's this whole life cycle, it's this whole implementation process that is just time consuming. And what I always like to say is that time is your enemy in this scenario, because if you go in and you sit down with an end user and you gather their requirements, they say, I need this dashboard, I need these 3 reports, and then you have to go off and spend a month or 8 weeks to build that, and you come back to them, and they say, well, okay, that looks good, but this is wrong and this is wrong, change this, and you have to go back and you have to spend 3 more weeks changing it. By the time you actually get it right, that ship has sailed. Right? That data might not be relevant to them anymore. Something might have changed. You might have added a new product. Now or added new salespeople, or you're shipping out of a different warehouse or something. Your business is going to change, and so your data warehouse and your BI environment needs to be able to change at the same rate as your business does. So that's what we get. That's where we get to the actual data warehouse automation tool that we have, and we call that the Jet Data Manager. And here are the primary components of it. So we connect to a data source, and we can really connect to 99.9% of the data sources out there. There's only some very old ones and some disused ones that we have trouble with, and we can always kind of get around that trouble. But if you have a database, we can generally connect to it. And that's what we do, is we connect to it. We pull the data out that we want to pull out, not all of it, but a subset of it that makes sense for reporting. And then we put it into what we call a staging database. And this is where what a staging database is a place where we can put the data in a nice clean place where we can work on it, right? We can clean the data, we can add business logic to it, we can add rules. An example here is, let's say that if you have sales transactions and the salesperson code does not exist on, say, half of those sales transaction records, then in the staging database, we can write a procedure that says if the salesperson code is not on the transaction, go to the customer card and pull it from there and place it on the transaction. Right? So that's kind of one of the programmatic things that we can do in a staging database. And then we go into a data warehouse and we consolidate the data. We structure it the way that it needs to be structured. So if you want to see your product hierarchy set up a certain way, that's where we do it. Or if you want to see your dates represented in a certain way, that's where we do it. And then we optimize that data warehouse so that it is quick. And optimization comes in a couple different forms. One is that we have taken, as I said, a subset of the data, not the entire data set, so it's automatically going to be faster. But then we can add indexing or we can add some other procedures that make the data very fast to return results when you go in and you query it. Then we come to the last part of the BI environment, which is your cubes, right? And cubes are where we go a step further than the data warehouse and certainly a step further than the staging database, and we organize your data into subject matters. So everything in the database that's related to sales, let's put into a sales cube, right? And everything that's in finance, let's put that into a finance cube. And this becomes even more optimized and faster. We compress that data so it's very quick. In those cubes, we can add business calculations or metrics, sometimes called KPIs. A good example of it is average gross profit percentage. It's probably something that doesn't exist in your ERP, but we can put the data together and we can do that calculation in the cubes, so that all you have to do is click on a box that says average gross profit and that number pops up for you. Okay, so I sped through that a bit. Hopefully that was not too fast for folks to get a review from or to get level set on. So let's go, I don't know why I did that. Let's go and look at Jet Enterprise in action. Before I do this, I want to say that there's two parts to this little demonstration that I'm going to do. And first part is the front end, and then we're going to move to the back end. And so two different things. So I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit, but I'll warn you when it happens so no one gets confused. And let me go here first. Okay, so remember how I talked, so this is front end, remember how we talked about we typically start people in Excel. So that's the first thing I want you to notice about this little dashboard that I built here, is that we are actually in Excel. And we have built an Excel add-in that does some proprietary Jet functions and then extends the functionality of Excel. So when you're a licensed Jet user and you open up your version of Excel, you will see this little Jet tab up here. And when I click on that Jet tab, you see that we have all these different ways in the ribbon to produce a report, all these different icons, all these different wizards, report builder, the report wizard, the table builder, the browser, all this stuff. Lots of different ways. Remember, this is a 15-year-old product. A lot of user feedback has gone into this. Ton of features designed to be as simple as humanly possible. The reason why you would use one icon over another is sometimes user preference. Sometimes it depends on what it is that you're trying to build. Is it a dashboard or a financial report? And sometimes it depends on the data source that you're actually going to. Right? So the point there is lots of options. Okay, so this is the dashboard that I've built, right? I'm kind of proud of this one because it has a little forecast in there and it's kind of cool, and I can click on the buttons and we'll see the data change. It's kind of neat. And let me show you how we build a report from scratch. So I'm going to go to a new worksheet. I'm going to use what I think is the quickest way to build a report in the entire Jet Enterprise suite. And this is actually what I do when someone asks me a question. I have to go build an ad hoc report. I'm going to go to a pivot table, and I'm going to say which cube, I'm going to use AX for this example. I think Brian's going to do something in Nav later. Which cube do I want to hit? These are our out-of-the-box cubes. These things come ready for ready for action when we install. And I'm going to pick a sales cube, and I'm going to say, I now have this list here that I'm moving around. This is my field list. And again, this is what comes out of the box ready to use. And you'll notice here that I've got all sorts of data. I've got transactional data. I've got data about my customers. I've got some what we call dimensionality. So let's organize that data by date or by item group or by location. So that's what I have working out of the box. What I want you, the most important thing about this is that you can put anything that you want to in this list. Right? This is a generic data structure. Any field from any of your data sources or any combination of any field from any of your data sources can appear here. And that's a back-end function. That's data warehouse automation. We can do it very quickly. It happens without a lot of fuss, and that's really a big differentiator for us and a big sort of value point is that you can have total control over your data and put in whatever you want to in this list. All right, so let's build a report. I want to see my sales, and I want to see that organized over time, and I want to see that organized by item group. Right, so 3 clicks, and I got this, kind of cool looking table, and I can show you more detail here. I can drill down into my product hierarchy. I can double click on any number. Let me get a good one here, and I have this, which is a detailed description of what makes up that top line aggregated transaction. Right, so drill down capability. 3 easy clicks. I can filter the data and say I want to see a filter by year, and I want to see a filter by item group. Right, whoa, did something funny there. I'm just going to, sometimes I make mistakes just to show how easy it is to fix them in JET, right? Because we all make mistakes. I certainly do. So get myself organized here, and let's say I just care about 2008. I just care about those 3 or 4 item groups. I want to see a chart, and there we go. So the thing to notice here is that with JET Enterprise, I had complete control over my data. I didn't have to know anything about the data. I just had to know what I was looking for. And I just clicked a couple of fields, and I get the data that I need. And I can filter it in it however I want. And I have complete control over my data visualization. So I have this chart, and I can go in, and I can change this all around, right? Make it look however I want. Ugly. There we go. It's a better one, right? Okay, so one example. So what those of you who are in the know are saying to yourself right now, probably grumbling, is, well, that's a pivot table in Excel, right? And and you're right. This is a pivot table that we have put on top of an OLAP cube. So let me show you another example of something that's a little bit different. So now I'm going to go to a new tab. You know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to open up a new Excel sheet for this, and we'll do this. So I'm going to go to the JET ribbon again. I'm going to open up a what we call the browser. I bet you that's going to open up. Oh, there it is. So this is my browser, right? And the browser is kind of cool because you can go to multiple different data sources and kind of poke around. So right now I'm pointed at my cubes. I can go to the actual transactional database. This is AX. Those of you who know AX know that it is a very big database. I think there's 4,800, 5,000 tables that come out of the box now in the latest version. And I can also go to my data warehouse. And it's cool here because you see I have all the tables that are in my data warehouse. For example, it's a lot less than is in my transactional database. And I can say I want to click on a table and see what fields exist in that table. And so here's all the fields that are in that table. And if I want to go and see what is a representation of the data that is in those fields, I can click this little drop down. It's a bad example. Let's see what we got here. And I can click around and I can see the data that is in those fields. So let's build a report from this. Show you how it works. So we go to cubes, and let's build, let's say, maybe an inventory report. And so to do that, I'm just going to drag out the items that I have in inventory. I am going to drag out the value of those items, and I want to see the quantity. And let's say something like cost of sales. Okay? So So what I've done is I've set up a little report to run, and I'm going to hit the report button up here on the ribbon, and it is going to go out to the database that I pointed it at, and it is going to give me a list. It's going to dump out all this data. All right, it happened pretty quick, right? That's what Jet does. It goes in and communicates with a data source, and it pulls data in the way that you have asked for it to be pulled in. And so, but that's kind of a gross list, I think. That's just a big list of items and their values. Let's see if we can do anything else with this. So I'm going to go back into the browser, and I'm going to say, I want to see each of my item groups on its own Excel sheet. So I'm going to set the browser to say Sheets. I'm showing you how we can kind of format anything we want to here. I'm going to pull item group out. I'm going to close the browser, and I'm going to go to, oops, I made a mistake. Let me do this here. Let me just fix that mistake. All right, so now we're going to go back into design mode. There we go, that's better. And do the browsing. I'm going to do the same thing again. So I set it for Sheets. I'm going to pull out my item group, and we're going to close the browser. Then I'm going to say, let's use a different icon up here to show you how it works. Call that the Jet Function Wizard. I'm going to use this to further format my data. And so you can see what happened when I was pulling data out is it asked me what I wanted. I want my data in rows. What table do I want to hit? I want to hit my inventory table. What fields from that table am I pulling? And so I can further format this by saying I want to put each item group on its own individual sheet. And we'll do that. And then I'm going to do some Excel formatting here to demonstrate that we're using all of Excel that's super familiar to everybody. Give it a blue color. I want to build a chart here. There's my chart. And now it's time to run the report. Back to the Jet ribbon. Hit the report button. And we're doing the same thing. We're going off. We're communicating with the data source. We're pulling the data back that I asked for. And we're going to format it in the way that I have asked it to be formatted. And as this spins up, it takes about 11 or 12 seconds. As this spins up, we're going to see that sure enough, each of my different item groups was on its own sheet. So there's DVRs, there's DVDs, there's enclosure components, whatever those are. There's my home theater systems, right? So again, control of the data, formatted in the way that I want it to be formatted. And what I like to point out here is this is a fairly complicated little report, right? I've got a chart, a table of data here, and I've got a chart, and it's kind of formatted the way that I want it to. But it didn't take me very long to build, right? And that's what Jet's all about. Let's make it as simple as humanly possible for an end user to get at their data. And so that's an example there. And and this is where you can do a lot of different stuff with Jet, right? Like here's a typical financial report. You can do a balance sheet or an income statement or a P&L, or your operational reports like an aged AR report if you want. And we actually started out our life as a company as a financial report writer, and so financial reporting and statutory reports, that's in our blood. And so, and likewise, these are easy to build. It's all designed for speed and end user functionality. And again, that was kind of a flyby of the Jet ribbon. We only touched on a couple of those things. There's lots of different ways to build a report. I'll encourage anybody who wants to take a deeper dive into this to reach out to us, and we can show you all the intricacies of how it works. Okay, so as I warned you, I am going to switch gears here in a second. But before I do that, there we are. Before I do that, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to talk about the back end here in a second. And I'm going to talk about the back end in the context of something that's familiar to us, which is Excel, which is what we've been looking. So the point with the back end part of this demonstration is to show you how easy it is to change this list. And that's another way of saying how easy it is to get the data that you need into your data warehouse and into your cubes. So to do that, I'm going to go to this report. And this is a sales report. You can see that I've got all my sales organized, largest to smallest by state for the top 10 states that we sell into. Okay, fair enough. Let's say I'm a business user and I want to I want to get a little more granular with my analysis, and I want to see my sales by zip code. So what I'll do is I'll go into the field list here, and I'll just go in and I'll just find sales. I'll find zip code, right? And so I think it's going to be in the customer accounts, and I'll go in here and I'll look for it. And I don't see zip code. Okay, and trust me, it's not in there. Right? There's no zip code in there. So what do? Well, we need to add it from the data source into the data warehouse and into the cubes. In order to do that, I'm going to go to our data warehouse automation platform tool, which we call the Jet Data Manager. Okay, and so I'm going to warn you, this demo gets a little geeky, but stay with me. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, and it's going to take me about 3 or 4 minutes. So this is our backend tool. This is a power user tool or developer tool. I wouldn't really advise a business user to spend a lot of time in here, right? Because this is, if you've heard my other presentations, this is where we come together as a company and we decide what needs to go into our data warehouse, and it's not a trivial thing. But if you wanted to just add something, I'm going to show you how easy it is to add, and what we want to do is add zip code. So I'm going to go into my data source here, which this happens to be AX, and I'm going to look for zip code, and I happen to know that zip code in the database exists on the customer table. So if you look here on the left-hand side of your screen, these are all the tables that I have pulled into my data warehouse. If you look over here on the right-hand side of your screen, this is all the tables and ultimately all the fields that exist in this particular AX database. We've hooked up the Jet Data Manager to AX, and for lack of a better word, it sniffs that data and it presents it for me right here. This is everything. And so if I open up customer table and I look for zip code, in fact, I'm just going to search for zip code, right? There we go. And it's going to tell me here's zip code. What I'm going to do in order to add it is simply this. I'm going to click the box, and it gets added. And that is one of those software demos that's kind of frustrating because we didn't see what really happened. Because what really happened was, in the background, an SSIS transfer package was written, was built and written. And again, that's that 8 inches of SQL code that I talked about. It would take a skilled SQL programmer about an hour to do what I just did in a second. And that's really, again, that's where the magic lies. That means that you can pick up the phone and you can say, hey, I need to add zip code to that report. Okay, hold on, I'll do it while you're on the phone, and then we can test it together. It's that sort of thing instead of logging a ticket with IT and making a business case for why you need zip code and having them go off and take, hours and hours and hours to do it. And, maybe you have to wait a week or so before they can actually get to it. And we're just talking about one field, right? That's the way it is with using traditional methods. This is the way it should be, right? This is doing what software is supposed to do. It's making the incredibly complex simple, okay? So we've added it to actually the staging database. Now we have to do a few more things, a couple more steps to actually get it into Excel. And so I'm going to show you those. I'm going to go and I'm going to, to this, to the data warehouse, and I'm going to, and you see that the customer table is conveniently highlighted in red because I've just changed it. I've just added something to it. I'm going to take zip code. I'm going to put it in its own little window here. So just one of the usability features. I'm going to close that to keep it clean. And I'm going to actually put it into the actual data warehouse exactly where I want it to be. So I'm going to open up my tables, and I'm going to put it into my customer table because that's where I want it to appear when we get to Excel. And this is a decision that you can make. Okay, so that got highlighted red. I'll just open it up and see there it is, zip code. Okay, we're done with this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to what we call deploy and execute this. And so what's happening here is that I'm going to kick that off. Is that I am executing all these different tasks. I'm rebuilding the data structure. I'm executing that integration services transfer package. I'm enforcing these data cleansing rules that I've set up. And that all is actually 24 SQL tasks there, and it took 12 seconds. Again, that's hours and hours and hours of work that somebody would have had to do. I'm going to close that. We're going to go to the cube section. I'm going to go and I say I want to add the zip code to my customer dimension. And so that's just, I'm going to open that. I'm going to right click here. I'm going to add what we call a quick level. I'm going to go down and I'm going to search and see that we have zip code. There it is. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to do that deploy and execute thingy again. And kind of the same thing is happening, right? We are rebuilding a table structure or cube structure because I just changed it. We're enforcing all the cleansing rules. We're rebuilding any stored procedures that might be in there. We can even get it as complex as enforcing something like slowly changing dimensions or building a surrogate key or doing field transformations. So that's what Brian is going to talk about in just a second here. So I don't want to steal his thunder. But the point is that this piece of software does some incredibly complex stuff, and it makes it look very simple. And I like to say that this sort of takes the technology part out of your BI building process. It kind of makes the technology part almost an afterthought. And that's important because what that lets you do is focus on strategy, right? So, hey, we need zip code in our customer data because we're starting a new marketing campaign that targets zip codes, and we've got some good intel around that, right? So that's strategy, and that's what this is letting you talk about instead of having to worry about, oh, who's going to do the SQL code? Okay, we're done with that. Go back to Excel, and let's do this. I'm going to refresh this Excel sheet against this new cube that I've built, and it's going to do its thing. We're now refreshed. I'm going to go into my customer account. I'm going to look for zip code, and there it is. So I can take state out and put zip code in. I can do some formatting and say I want to do top 10. Okay. And let's just go ahead and sort that A to Z. There we go. Okay, now zip code's in. My analysis is done. I just rebuilt a part of a data warehouse in all of about 5 minutes, right? And I was talking while I did it, so it could have been much faster. Okay, so that is my example. That's a really quick example of how a data warehouse automation works. I think you kind of get the point. I brought Brian along with me because Brian leads the team that does all of our implementations and our customizations for our clients. And so he is much better at talking about how our solution works in the real world. He's got a ton of great stories about the work that he's done for customers, some of the crazy requests that we've had, and how he has achieved those requests. So Brian, if you're ready, I'm going to make you the presenter, and I think what I do is stop sharing and give you a presentation. Brian, are you still among the living there? I'm not hearing your chipper voice. You might be on mute.
Can you hear me, John?
I can now, yes.
Yep, yeah, you are right. I had actually muted myself. So let me go ahead and show my screen here. All right, so you should be able to see this now. Is that correct? Just to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So yeah, thanks, John. So hi, everybody. I'm Brian Peterson. I'm the Director of Business Intelligence globally here at Jet Reports on the technical side. And so what I wanted to do is just go into a little bit more detail about some of the things that John had talked about, and talk about some of the additional features, functionality, and things like that our backend application, the Jet Data Manager, provides. As he had mentioned, it's a data warehouse automation tool that really does a lot of the scripting, builds a lot of the SQL code for us, which makes it much easier for you to roll out changes, basically do more work in less time, essentially. As he had talked about before, we have, our data sources. He'd shown everything on the AX side. I'm looking at a nav database, but what I'm talking about is really relevant to pretty much anything. Where we can pull in information from a wide variety of systems. Here I'm looking at nav. To add additional systems, I could just right-click on data sources, and you can see here that I can pull from anything that's SQL-based, Oracle-based, ODBC, text files, Excel files. We have adapters for a number of the different Dynamics products, Salesforce, and a lot of other things as well. And so adding information from various systems across the organization is handled from directly within the Jet Data Manager here. Now, to talk into a little bit more detail about what he went over briefly, as far as some of the things that we do, As he had shown here, if I come in, let me just open up Excel. I'm not going to show you a front-end demo. I just want to illustrate a few things really quick. I can come in here, for example, and let's say that I want to look at something in my sales queue. Doesn't really matter what it is. I'm just showing you kind of from a no smoke and mirrors approach what we get and how everything looks. So here I have sales amounts, and I want to look at it by, customer information, by country, sure. And then what typically happens is our end users come in and say, well, this is what we provide out of the box. This is fantastic, but there are some additional things I want to see. For my customers, I want to be able to see who the contact person is. I want to see a phone number, things like that, and I want to be able to group them up a little differently. Now, just kind of going through that briefly as far as what that looks like, right here I don't have any of that information available, right? Just from an end user perspective. From a development perspective or a back-end perspective, that request comes in, Sally wants to be able to see information in a different manner, and instead of me having to go in and use all of the tools that John had talked about that historically come prepackaged with SQL Server, right? Visual Studio, integration services, analysis services, all of these things which are rather complex. We have a tool on the back end that helps us manage this. And it really speeds the time that we're able to deliver insights and deliver the things that the business users want, which ultimately is the goal, right? The goal is not to do development. The goal is to give the business users what they want. Development and speeding development just aids that process. So, so what I have the ability to do is come in here, first and foremost. All the tables that we currently have are on the left, all the tables that that are in our particular system. So when we hook this up to your database, it syncs up and shows all of your tables and fields and customizations and things like that. And I have the ability to come in and add in whatever it is that my end users want to see. So here I have some of the information for contact, right? I can add the email address. There's probably a telephone number somewhere. If there's anything else that makes sense, I can just get those pieces added in. But what this does, right, is right up here under the table section, as you saw before, it makes that table red. I have all of the pieces down here that I want added in, and I'll show you how we can go in and add those in here in just a moment. But one of the things that I want to show also is we have a very transparent methodology of how our tool works. Right? There are some things out there where you click some buttons and it does something. I don't know what it's doing, but apparently it does something. Right? We have a very transparent methodology. So if I want to come in here, for example, and rebuild this, I can do so. As John had showed you before, it goes in, it's going to build everything. I can see at a high level that it's rebuilding all of these tables in SQL to match what I want. I can see my whole execution package right there. But here I have my tasks. It rebuilds the integration services package. It rebuilds the data cleansing rules where we're bringing in all of these names and values from other fields in my database. But if I want to see what it's actually doing, we log all of that information. So if I want to see what this stored procedure is that does all of my data cleansing, there's the SQL code that it generates right there, which is of interest to the people that are doing this work. If I want to see, well, what is the integration service package actually doing? I have the ability using our backend tool to actually jump off, right, directly in by clicking this customize code button. I can jump directly off into SQL Server Data Tools, for example. And what this is going to do is this is going to jump right into the tools that Microsoft provides, load all of the pre-built packages, for example, that we do, and I can easily come in here and look at the data flow and what it's doing. So again, from a development perspective, it's very useful to be able to open these packages up and see exactly what it is that it's doing and modify them if I want, right? That's something that we can absolutely do as well. I can then import that package back into the Jet Data Manager once I've made any changes that I want, if that's necessary, and then that saves that information. So as far as the development tasks are concerned, those are all things that are very interesting. One of the things that John had mentioned is from a data cleansing perspective is we have the ability to add in customizations, right? I can add in fields that don't exist in the ERP system to handle calculations that otherwise have to be handled in a report, right? I'm sure we all have reports where I've got one field, I've got another field, I want to multiply those two together, I want to subtract them from each other or do something, and I have to do that in each and every single report. Again, going into the usability of the data warehouse, we want to take as much of that information and as many of those tasks as we can out of the user's hands and just make it so that they have the field that they need without having to worry about how things get calculated. And one example of that could be, if I come down into one of these tables, for example, if I want to get some sort of profitability calculation in here, I have a sales amount, I have a cost amount. If I want a field that just has the actual profit for all of these lines, I can come in here, I can right-click, I can add a custom field, I can call it profit amount, I can control what data type that is, right? So I can say it's, it's out to 20 decimals. And I've physically added a new field into this table that didn't normally exist. So I can drag this up, put it right next to the other pieces so it's easy for my users to see. And again, I can just right-click again, and I want to do something with this field so I can add a field transformation. All right? This allows me to plug in pretty much whatever SQL code I want. In this case, what I'm going to do is pretty straightforward. It's just going to be my sales amounts minus my cost amounts here. And I now have a field that my users wanted that didn't exist before that's doing some form of business calculation. And all I need to do at that point is just rebuild that table. I right-click. I know I was going through that kind of fast. I right-click. I deploy and execute. It saves a new version of my project, which we probably didn't see a second ago. It was pretty quick. But what that does, it's got also built-in version control. If I need to roll things back to a previous version of the project, I want to roll it back to a version yesterday or a minute ago or, a week ago, I can easily do that and go back to a different point. But I can now come in here and preview this table. And over here, for example, I have my sales amounts, right, my cost amounts. Oh, those are reversed, so I could easily come in here and fix that. But in this case, my cost amounts are negative. So I did this wrong, right? It should be sales amount plus cost amount since these are negative. And for me to go and do that, again, it's just a simple matter of, instead of having to redo all of the code I just did, I can just come in here, I can edit this guy, and I can realize, oh, I made a mistake. All I have to do is change the plus sign and come back in here and rebuild this. Again, so even when there are mistakes made, it's extremely easy for me to go in and correct those instead of saying, okay, where did I do that? Did I handle that in the integration services package? Did I handle that in the stored procedure? Let me go back and track that down. Again, it's an easy fix here in the UI. I can now come in one more time, preview this table, and make that a little bigger, and come over here and see that, okay, there we go. Now I sold it for $6,200. It cost $3,400. There's my profit amount. Any queries that I want to write as well, I can do from directly within the Jet Data Manager itself. It fully supports any and all SQL code, right? Makes it easier if I want to return a specific list of something to be able to do it in the application instead of having to be able, instead of needing to go off to Management Studio to do some of those things that historically we needed to do. Once again, if I come up here, going back to my original example, I have the customer fields that I had added that didn't exist previously for email address and phone number and some other things. If I want to just get these, actually I don't even need to do that. If I want to get these up into my customer table in my data warehouse, right, I can come right up here. I can see all of the things that I already have. And over on the right-hand side, right, there are actually a number of things that I haven't added yet, right? Address, contact, territory, none of those things that I saw in my cubes. So I can just drag all of these things over as I want them to exist, right? And what I'm doing right now, just so it's clear, I'm physically dragging fields from one SQL database, our staging database, to another SQL database. Again, going back to the historical methods of how these things are done, typically, it's a much more manual process. I have to open a Visual Studio and do all the work there. The data warehouse is built for business users. We can name these things that make sense. This is my telephone. That doesn't make any sense. Telephone number. This is going to be my my sales contact. That's how my users understand this and know this information. All right, so I can name these things whatever makes sense. And once again, I can just come up here and modify, deploy and execute just those things that I changed. The tool is smart enough to know how to run that. Now, like I showed you before, though, I still don't have all of this information in my cubes. It's in my data warehouse. All of the information, if our users are building reports off of the data warehouse for more transactional reporting, all of that information is now there in the Jet Data Manager. They can wrap up their reports, and that information is now there for any and all reports that they want to build going forward. Right? Again, the whole benefit of not having to do all of this complexity in each and every single report individually, but we can do it in the data warehouse. Right? If, for example, going back to the whole data governance piece, if I want to change this profit calculation that I built in down here as an organization, right? So some of the people that make all the decisions in my company decide that, you know, we've got to also account for discounts, right? So we have to come in here and it's this plus this minus that. I can do this here. I can rebuild it, and going forward, all of the reports that use this profit amount field are automatically calculated correctly. Right? Now that's a big idea, and that's a big thing because I talk to people all the time where they've built these calculations into reports. So in each and every single report, it's sales amount plus this minus that, and then what happens is someone decides they're going to change the way that profit is calculated organization-wide, and then the first question is, okay, we've got like 400 reports out there. Which reports use this, and which reports do we need to change? And it becomes a big endeavor. Again, handling all of these things in the data warehouse, I change it once. The next time someone refreshes a report, it's just calculated the way that it needs to be. So I know we're running out of time here. Just to wrap this up, the last thing I'm going to do, going back to what John showed briefly, is on the Cubes tab, I want to change the way that my customer information looks. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add some more things, and I'm going to add in telephone number, email, whatever this information is, right? All of these things that I had just added in. I'm going to go a little bit further, too. I'm actually going to come in here and say that I want to be able to group this up by something like my territory code, for example. So I'm going to right-click here. I'm going to add a hierarchy. I'm going to call it by sales territory. And here I can build out these hierarchies based on whatever makes sense. So territory code and then customer. Right? We can have multiple levels as well and kind of drag these around if that made sense. But this just allows it, it just makes it easy. I'm going to rebuild this while I'm talking. This makes it easy for me to group things up by whatever it is that I want. I have a feeling I didn't deploy something over there. Yeah. Oh, there are some special characters in here that Analysis Services doesn't like. There we go. So again, I just change that. It rebuilds everything. Maybe it's $sign. There we go. So I change it, I rebuild it. There were some characters that Analysis Services doesn't like, $signs, things like that. But it saves it, once again, as a new version of the project that I can easily revert back to. And then as we can see here, it's processing everything, and a few seconds later, I'll be able to go back into Excel once it's finished processing the sales side of everything here. Takes about 30 seconds there. And I can come into Excel, and whereas before I didn't have any of that information, I didn't have a territory hierarchy or anything else, I can just right-click, I can refresh this, and now I can look at sell to customer by territory. I have my territory codes and my customers. I can look at things like credit limit. So if I open up this territory and see all of these customers, I can then right-click in here and I can look at some of these properties that I wanted to see. So if I want to see the credit limit for these customers, doesn't look like we're using that. Bad example. If I want to see whoever the the sales contact is, and if I want to get the telephone number as well. So anybody that's using this can call up, call Dennis up and talk about something. All of that information can be easily placed within the canvas that we see right here. So again, just to kind of wrap up my portion before I pass it back to John, talking about the whole data warehouse automation concept, right? Not only does it allow us to quickly add in things that we need, right? So we can focus less on spending the time developing it and more on what should our organization be looking at, as well as being able to manage calculations and things like that as a group instead of having, 20 answers to the same question, essentially, when it comes to sales reporting and things like that. So with that being said, I believe that wraps up my portion. Just wanted to talk about the back end in a little bit more detail, but I will go ahead and pass this back to John.
All right, Brian, thank you. That was fantastic. And we're out of time here except for questions. So Brian said it best. Yeah, that's what data warehouse automation is all about. It's about, let me get my slide up here, sorry. Oop, there we go. It's about, bottom line is it saves time and it saves money, right? And that's not to discount the other things it does, which is allows you to focus on the right things, which allows you to focus on the stuff that takes more intellectual horsepower. Think about what data you need in your systems. Right? That's what data warehouse automation is all about. And we always say BI, we can get you to BI 5 times faster than any traditional method. And that's we've benchmarked that number. I would like to invite anybody to kind of reach out to us, let us do a more detailed presentation, take a look at some of your data. We can talk about how we would make this work in your organization. And as always at Jet, we've got tons of stuff, right? We're big on educating. We're not really big salespeople. We love to educate people. We love to talk about data. So we've got tons of white papers. We've got tons of videos. We have our knowledge base that's available with tutorials and videos of how to do this and how to do that. And we're always happy to have a conversation. I always kind of say this, if you would like to call and talk about BI strategy or how it might work or some issues that you're having, I promise you I will try to give you the most objective conversation about that as I possibly can. So, Jason, if you're still with us, do we have any questions?
I am here. We do have questions, and let me just remind folks you can use the Q&A block to the right of the slide area. John, we're actually not seeing your slide right now, so if you want to share like a contact slide, go ahead and do that. So the first question that came in was asking about how, I'm actually just searching for here, how can you show cubes at the front end in AX? And I think specifically AX 2012.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understood the question. I'm also struggling with the WebEx here to get my data to show, my slide to show. So can the person who answered that question, can you maybe type in a clarification for me?
We'll see if the person has is still here. They may have dropped off.
Right.
I think.
And John, I can talk to that briefly if you'd like. I believe I understand what they're looking for. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So as far as showing the information in pretty much anything, I believe that the example given was specific to AX 2012. But really, at the end of the day, what we provide is a data warehouse, which is a SQL database, a set of analysis services cubes, which are standard cubes that sit on SQL as well. And so as far as showing the information in AX or anything else, there are a number of ways to do that. I know that you can embed pieces from, for example, reporting services reports into the AX interface. So you could use reporting services against either one of those. Using some of the bits and pieces that we talked about, or with Power BI, I know that you can embed Power View diagrams into AX forms. for example. There's a lot of documentation on the web about that. So it's really a matter of not necessarily how do you do it, but what's the method that you want, what's the approach that you want, or what does the user feel most comfortable with, and then how do you show that? Because you can show Excel pieces, you can show reporting services reports, you can have everything out on SharePoint, and then basically show it as a web part of a website. So there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. And now I understand the question. Brian's right. So one of the things that a few users of ours have wanted to do is display some reports in the Role Center and in Enterprise Portal. And so we're able to do that using a web part. We also have, as Brian's point is well made, so we've got a ton of clients that are using SharePoint. And what we always say is all of them are successful, but no two of them are doing it the exact same way, right? So it's very kind of environment sensitive, and how you want to display it is going to determine the method that we use to display it. That's kind of one of the good things, or one of the important points about BI in general is data consumers need to see that data that they want in the way that they want to see it, when they want to see it, how they want to see it.
All right. We are at the top of the hour here, so we can start wrapping up. I'd make a last call for questions. I want to remind folks we are recording today's event. We recorded the previous day's events, and we'll keep you updated as we add those to the site. We should have those up today and tomorrow, and we'll make those available to all of you. Well, John and Brian, first let me just say thanks to both of you for attending today and for running the series.
Okay, well, yeah, you're more than welcome. I always say it's an honor to work with the Dynamics World folks. You guys always do a great job, so thanks for having us.
All right, and thanks to everyone in the audience. We hope today's session was a good one for you if you've been attending the rest of the series. Thanks for joining us throughout. It's been a great week. We are going to conclude there, so thanks. And please look out for the survey as we close out as well. That concludes today's event. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
folks. Thanks, everybody.